Just the other day, I released a video going over how my rental property business pays zero in taxes. This is for a single-family home that I own in Indianapolis, Indiana. I talked about some of the tax advantages of real estate that many investors can take advantage of, such as depreciation, where you can offset a lot of your rental income to where you really don't have to pay taxes on a lot of it. But not everything is so fantastic with the property, as I've recently tried to go through the refinancing process to pull a lot of my money out of this property, but I'm running into some serious trouble. I want to use this video as an opportunity to give you guys some pointers on what to look out for, especially on the financing side when you're looking at mainly cheap real estate, cheap being homes around $100,000 or so in value, because there are some things to watch out for. But before I get into that, just wanted to introduce myself for those of you who are new to the channel. My name's Jack Duffley, and I'm a 23-year-old real estate investor and soon-to-be attorney, and on this channel I cover a variety of topics as they relate to investing and personal finance. So if you like that sort of content, be sure to have a look around the channel, and if you like what you see, be sure to subscribe. But to give you guys some context, I bought my first rental property. It was an out-of-state single-family home in Indianapolis, Indiana. I currently live in Chicago, Illinois, and I made that purchase at the end of July of 2020. Very importantly, I bought the property within an LLC, so I did not buy it in my own name. I actually own the umbrella LLC, which then owns the property level LLC, which owns the property. So there's sort of two layers of LLCs there, and the property level LLC is the one that actually ended up buying this property. Now, how did I fund this property, you might ask? Well, I technically used cash, but the cash was pulled from a different kind of debt. That debt was a HELOC on my primary residence. So basically what I did is I pulled money out using my HELOC, made that into a big cash pile, and then moved that into the LLC account, which could then make a purchase from there. So it technically was a cash purchase on the LLC's end. However, I actually have debt in my personal name that was then used to fund the business in a way. So on paper, it was a cash purchase, but it really was using debt. However, there's no actual debt attached to the rental property itself. Now, HELOC stands for Home Equity Line of Credit. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but basically it's like a giant credit card attached to your home, and if you can get one, it can offer some serious financial flexibility. However, you have to be careful since it's usually variable rate, which means that the rate on that HELOC can go up, and that's not a very good thing, and you got to be very careful with that. So you don't want to over leverage yourself using variable rate loans, especially because if interest rates rise, then your expenses are going to rise too. But anyways, my initial plan with this property was to buy it using the HELOC funds, technically in cash, and then I would make any repairs as needed, potentially bump rents as well since they're well below market right now, and that would allow me to hopefully get a pretty sizable cash out refinance, which is where I'd go to the bank and tell them, look at this property, it's worth much more than I bought it for, and I should be able to pull out this amount in a loan, and then I would get that as cash in my pocket, and then I could then pay myself back to the HELOC. So then that would wipe out the HELOC. So just kind of a debt merry-go-round if you want to look at it that way. But because HELOCs are revolving, that would allow me to use the HELOC funds again for a different purchase, which was the ultimate goal. But with the whole shutdown and the fact that I was still in law school when I bought the property, I wasn't in a huge rush to actually buy another property since, first off, I needed to find another opportunity, which I didn't have at the moment, and I was trying to wait till we had a little bit more income between my wife and I, and one of us at least was out of school, so that one of us could definitely focus on making an income full-time rather than part-time like we were when we actually bought the property. Fast forward to today, I'm now done with school. I took the bar exam and I'm waiting on those results to see if I can actually become an attorney, but I'm working a lot more hours now and I'm making a much more significant income than I was back in July, which means I'm definitely a lot more able to take on potentially more debt to buy another property or something like that. I'm ready to try and find another deal. And back in late January or early February of this year, I started the refinance process to try and get that money out of the property. However, when a property is held in an LLC and not your own name, it can be a lot harder to get financing, generally speaking, since typically when it's in your name, there's a lot more loan options out there. You can do owner-occupied loans and a lot of different programs out there since the bank's just looking at your ability to pay the loan and they're not really going to care about what the property's doing, generally speaking. But this obviously isn't a commercial property. It's not like it's a 10-unit apartment building where all the bank will have to do is look at the income. It's still a single-family home, so the value of that home is determined by market comparables, just like any other home. So I'm kind of in this weird sort of no man's land between commercial property financing and single-family home financing in your own name. So I'm somewhere in between there, and there aren't a lot of lenders actually that do LLC loans or commercial-style financing for single-family homes under certain thresholds. One threshold that I'm discovering is that generally properties under $125,000 are pretty hard to get financing for when they're in an LLC. In your own name, it can be a little easier, but still your terms are going to be a lot worse, generally speaking, than if you had bought a more expensive property or potentially one with more rental income potential. Now, I actually bought my property for $85,000, and it's probably worth around $100,000, maybe a little bit more now since we've had so much appreciation across the nation in many markets over this past year. So it's probably worth somewhere just above $100,000 in my estimation, because there's quite a few comparables that have sold recently or are currently in the process of being sold that are actually well above that. And there are a couple properties that have been in much worse conditions than mine that have recently sold for around that $85,000 mark. So that should be a floor on what my property could potentially be worth if I were to take it to a lender. Now, I mentioned that $125,000 threshold that many lenders have to meet. There are some that I've found that allow a $100,000 threshold. So it needs to be worth at least $100,000 if they're going to lend on it. And that's just their blanket rule that they do. They don't make exceptions. It's a little bit annoying. Maybe that's just because I'm a rookie investor. If I was a veteran investor with dozens of properties, it might be easier to get this sort of financing and cheap real estate. But because I'm a rookie, for some reason, they don't really, maybe it's just the transaction costs. They don't really care about a cheap property. If it was a big one, it'd be worth doing a foreclosure or whatever if it ever came down to that. It's annoying to have to go through that whole transaction. If it's a very cheap property, they're not going to make a lot on the back end in the event of a complete catastrophe, of course, which I'm going to avoid at all costs. So I already have slim pickings when it comes to finding a lender who would even lend on a $100,000 home. I was actually able to find a lender through a business loan broker who was willing to do a 30-year loan at around a 4.8% interest rate, but with pretty high fees on the front end, something like 3 to 4 points, which is a lot. And that's definitely not nearly as good as something like an owner-occupied loan, where you can get it at like 2.5% interest with no points and just a couple fees up front. But it seemed worth it since I would pull out most of my money out of the property and could then use it to buy other investments, and it was worth paying those fees up front if it came down to it. But any lender is going to need an appraisal saying that the property is worth what it is, and then that is sort of their confirmation to actually go ahead and lend on it. This is where I ran into problems. The appraiser that the lender sent out said that the property was worth $85,000 after I had already done a couple grand in work on it to definitely make it worth more than I actually bought it for, and after we've had over 6 months of more appreciation as this market has continued to stay very hot. One of the more frankly offensive parts of this appraisal was that one of the comparable properties of the only handful that the appraiser was using was actually one that closed in March of 2020. This is March 2020, right as the pandemic was beginning. This was actually right before all the rate cuts happened, which helped drive more debt into real estate to push asset values up. This happened before all of the foreclosure forbearance programs and all that stuff that has continued to hamstring supply in the real estate market, which has also driven more prices up and up and up. This is before all of the currency devaluation from all of the printing that the Federal Reserve has done as the government has been spending like mad. What I'm trying to say is that using a March 2020 comparable property in February of 2021 after a worldwide pandemic has caused all these different changes in the real estate market. You've had interest rates slashed, you've had massive appreciation across the board, and you've had many different transactions in the meantime. You should not be using that. But I'm not a licensed appraiser, so my opinion must be meaningless. But anyways, I appealed this appraisal because it was ridiculous and definitely was undershooting it by at least a few $1,000s, at least. Maybe it was worth in the 90s, not even over $100,000, but it was not worth $85,000. If I listed this on the market tomorrow for $95,000, it would probably sell within 24 hours. That's how hot the Indianapolis real estate single-family home market is right now. But after I appealed this appraisal and pointed out a number of transactions much closer to this refinance date that were also the same model and same year as the home that I own, I was still unable to get this appraisal raised, so I was out of luck with this lender. The lender would not lend on a property below $100,000 in worth, and they deemed it worth $85,000 when really it's not worth that, but whatever. I can't really change the lender's mind. They're the ones with the money. They call the shots. So I'm not really sure what I'm going to do next. I'll get to that in a second. But my word of warning for you is to make sure that if you're buying cheaper single-family homes around that $100,000 mark or below, be aware that it might be very difficult to get financing, especially if you put it in an LLC. You're not buying it as an owner-occupant first. If you're buying it directly as a rental, financing might be an issue. And even if you can get financing, be aware you're probably going to have to pay quite a few points or a pretty high interest rate, much higher than you would be paying as an owner-occupant with a traditional, conventional mortgage. I guess on the bright side, if your money is trapped in a $60, $70, $80,000 home or even $100,000 home, it's a lot better than it being trapped in a $500,000 property or something like that, because that is a lot more money. I guess that's the positive outlook here. But as for what I'm going to do next, I'm not really sure if I'm going to try to refinance this property again. It's not a ton of money in the grand scheme of things. We're talking about maybe $60,000 to $70,000 I could have pulled out with a successful refinance, which is significant, no doubt, but I do have a lot of debt to pay down anyways. And I don't think it would hurt to have 1, 2, or 3 single-family homes that don't have any debt on them as a sort of base foundation to my portfolio, rather than potentially getting over-leveraged and having that extra risk. It's something I'm still trying to work my way through mentally. I'm not sure what I should go for. I think I'm leaning towards that just because it seems like it's going to be such a hassle trying to get a loan on this, easily at least, on good terms. And it is technically sort of leveraged right now using my HELOC at a 2.25% interest rate, so I'm getting some good value there. I will have to pay that down eventually though, because I don't want that variable rate being exposed as a risk to me. But that's pretty much all I've got for today. I just wanted to point this out to anyone who might be considering or is buying cheaper real estate, single-family homes, especially in the Midwestern markets. You see a lot of these $80,000 to $100,000 homes out there, which have pretty good yields and you can get some good cash flow, but just be aware that it might be difficult to get financing on all of these homes. But if you like this video, then definitely like it, since that would help the channel out a lot. And if you like this sort of content about real estate and investing, then definitely have a look around the channel. And like I said before, if you like what you see, be sure to subscribe, since I put out new videos every single week. And check out my book, The One Property Retirement, which is about a simple strategy for building your retirement nest egg using real estate. And it actually focuses on owner-occupied loans as a chief sort of thrust of the strategy, since you can get some really great terms, go through that whole process from beginning to end, from running the numbers and vetting the deal on the property to actually closing on the property and renting it out thereafter. If you end up reading the book, definitely leave a review on Amazon, since that would help me out a lot. But until next time, take care.